Today's episode is brought to you by Create Engage, the specialist digital marketing agency for the disruptive management consultancy. Now, for long-time listeners, you will probably already know who we are. You may have even heard one of our ads on a previous episode of this podcast. But for those of you who don't, here is a short introduction. At Create Engage, we help you create an effective marketing strategy for your consultancy, a strategy that will resonate with your target clients. And then we support you by delivering the campaigns you need to turn that strategy into a reality, helping you to build your brand, raise your profile with your prospective clients, and ultimately generate return on investment from your marketing activity. Now, I could tell you about many of the great clients that we work with and the results we've delivered for them. But instead, I'm going to do something much more powerful and something that I would recommend you do for your own marketing. I'm going to let our clients do the talking for us. If you are currently thinking about marketing for your consultancy, you're going to want to listen to this.
Create Engage started the process for us. They managed it end to end. They came up with some really creative ideas and we were really happy with the work that they did, which meant that we could just focus on running the business. Not only did we start conversations with clients that we hadn't spoken to before, but also there was tangible return on investment by some work that we were given.
They've helped right from the initial shaping of the idea through to helping us work out what our end goal was. They've supported us with the visual identity and our positioning of the brand.
We've had an immediate expansion of our network and have initiated a raft of new conversations with owners, CEOs in target client organisations, and has led to us winning new projects already.
One of the greatest compliments, I guess, is that one of our competitors even said that they really like what we're doing with marketing. They wish they could be doing something as good.
So from our perspective, we couldn't recommend Create Engage any more than this.
I would certainly recommend Create Engage if you're a consulting firm. They really understand consultancies and the sort of challenges we face. And I don't think you're going to get much better marketing anywhere else.
So I wouldn't hesitate to recommend Create Engage. They did a really good job for us.
So if you're looking for an agency that can help you achieve the results that our clients just described, then head to our website, createengage.co.uk, where you can find out more about how we support consulting firms like you. You can download our latest ebook and you can get in touch to talk about how we can help you take your consultancy to the next level through digital marketing. Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Climbing Consulting. For regular listeners, it is worth saying that this is going to be the last episode of 2022. We will be back in early 2023, early being January, is worth saying. With our next episode, got some really exciting guests lined up, some very big guests in terms of our industry, and a whole host of different people that I've already recorded with, am recording with, and planning to record in January and February. So we've got a whole host of guests to come. But just in case you are wondering, if you open your podcast app in 2 weeks from today, where the next episode is actually going to be 4 weeks from today because of that Christmas break. So just so you know. But back to the intro, today's guest, and you've probably already guessed this from the title, but today I am speaking to James O'Sullivan, CEO of Project One. Now, I first came across James when I saw one of his LinkedIn videos, something completely different to anything that I had seen from a consulting CEO before. Now, having seen James like to do things differently, I knew that there would be a great story there, and I wanted to get him on the show. And I was very glad when he said yes. James's career is a fascinating example of how you don't have to follow that traditional career path to climb to the top in our industry. James started his project management career at Tate and Lyle, of all places, after sending letters to all 100 of the FTSE 100. For those who aren't in the UK, that's the UK stock exchange, similar to the S&P 500 in the US. And he was rejected by 99 of those companies. But Tate and Lyle said yes. And that was the start. That gave him a taste for what would become his passion for the next 25 years and see him go on to lead major change programs for the likes of Lloyds Banking Group and NAB. But James's story isn't just one of contracting success. In 2014, James joined Project One, and after rising through the firm, became CEO earlier this year. With his wealth of experience and his love of doing things differently, I knew that this was going to be a good conversation, and it certainly didn't disappoint. In this one, we go into detail on a whole host of topics that I know you are going to love hearing about and getting James's perspective on, including his early career and actually how that time in in-house roles set him up for success leading Project One. Project One's unique approach and why they ignore many of the industry norms when it comes to running their business. And the journey that James went on in that transition to becoming CEO and his advice if you are about to undertake a major leadership change in your own firm. Now, it doesn't matter whether you are on the path to becoming a CEO or you're already there. James's candid and straight-talking advice is something that I know you are going to love. So, with all of that said, please enjoy today's conversation, the final conversation of 2022 for Climbing Consulting. Have a lovely Christmas, a happy new year, and I hope you enjoy listening to my chat with James O'Sullivan. Well, James, thank you for making the trip to Bath. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be in the West Country.
Well, and it's actually a first for me in that usually it's podcast first and then lunch. We've done lunch first and then podcast. So we've had a good chat before this, some of which we will cover, some we might not. Your TV choices, I'm a big fan of Below Deck as well. I'm going to check out the car wrapping YouTube that you shared. So I will definitely do that after. But for those who maybe don't know you, don't know Project One, can you give a bit of background on who you are and how you got to where you are today to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Probably in a different way to most people in consulting. So I did not join a graduate scheme at the age of 21 and come up through the ranks. I've jumped about a bit. So I always came out of university wanting to work for a FTSE 100 company. I wrote to all 100 of them at the time. I still remember walking into the post office in Putney High Street and asking for 100 stamps. Needless to say, 99 of them didn't reply, but one did, Tate and Lyle Sugar. And I drifted into, or went straight into a HR training and learning kind of program. And from then I've done project and program management for the rest of my career. But I did that via high street banking for a good number of years. That took me into the wonderful world of Y2K and UAT, which again gave me another fixation. I then went on looking for a purpose-built job in project and program management before going into consultancy in my late 20s with Capita. Did some big programs, your London congestion charging from design to implementation. And then having built a pretty good network up, I did a stint as a contractor, but in reality it was two big stints, one with an Australian bank and one with a British bank, where I kind of rose up through the ranks running bigger and bigger programs, bigger and bigger budgets before coming into Project One 8 years ago. But again, that wasn't by mistake. Terry Holland, who was the previous CEO, but back in those days, the regional director for London and the South East, we had worked together for 17 years, I think, by the end. And so, I went in again on that network basis, but I loved the concept of Project One, which still rings true today as we approach our 25th anniversary. So it's a boutique, an SME consultancy. It has a very particular operating model, which is all geared around experienced consultants, kind of your 15, 20 years, therefore putting in program directors, program managers, the leads into big, complex change.
I think a very succinct overview, and we will dig into all of that. And yes, particularly sort of your journey with Project One. Just because I love the idea of the person in the post office's face when you said 100 stabs. Take me back to this because you mentioned and we were talking about this at lunch. You weren't academic at school. You obviously went to university. You weren't sort of. Again,
I wasn't academic there
either. That didn't change, but. Talk to me about the plan to. Where did that come from? The plan to. I'm going to write to all 100.
I think it was quite a simplistic plan at the time. I'd grown up kind of preferring sport to academic. My brain definitely is not wired in an academic way, but I love sport. So I did rugby, I did swimming, I did athletics, were kind of my three things. All the way through university, I was playing sport to a pretty good level, and I was at university in London, and therefore you got yourself surrounded by all these people that were coming from like Salomon Brothers and stuff at the time for training. And you kind of went, oh, okay, I've got to go to the bright lights. I've got to drift from Putney into the city. And so I just kind of thought that was the obvious place to start. I knew I wasn't going to be picked up, in the milk rounds and all that kind of stuff. And therefore I thought, well, you've got to go and do this yourself. And what's the most practical way of doing it? I'll just write to them. Now, I don't think it would work in this day and age, but back then in the, mid-90s, it seemed like the right thing to do. Clearly, it had a great response, 99 responses.
But it had one.
But it had one. And that's the key thing, isn't it? You've got to try these things because you just never know.
And was this physically handwriting 100 letters?
No. It was typed. It was one that was typed and then just...
Oh, it was. So it was Control F or maybe Control F wasn't a thing then, but it was change name, insert here.
It was absolutely the same. But it seemed a good thing to do. So as you said, I was sat there with, the Telegraph or someone, I guess, or the Daily Mail probably back in those days, wasn't it? Looking at the FTSE 100 and just finding all the addresses, writing to the HR function.
And I know I'm going back a lot here, and I'm not going to dig too much further, but do you remember what the letter said? Was there anything, or maybe the better question is, when you asked the person at Tate Lyle, why were you the ones that replied? What was it that stood out to them?
I don't remember what the letter said, but I would imagine it was something just along the lines of, I'm a good team player, I do a lot of sport, I've done a business degree, and I live in London. As for Tate and Lyle, it's funny, and this is something I guess that's carried on throughout my career. You get to work with these household brand global names, and you have a perception from the outside as to what they're going to be like. But in reality, often on the inside, it's not. They're all quite similar in some respects, but they need people's help. And in reality, that's all that was happening at that point in time. Was they were about to run what was the largest training scheme, an NVQ scheme, I think it was, back in those days for the whole workforce on the world's largest refinery in Silvertown in East London. And they needed people to kind of, in effect, bring that to life. And so it was a very simple conversation because it was all about, can you get on a network with people? Can you go and have all these conversations? We've got X thousand people across a 12-acre refinery. We're looking for people that have got the confidence to go and help. And as you said, the teamwork came to play.
Well, and I think there's something implicit in there around, was it the old, it's a bit of a cliche, but luck is opportunity and preparation, or luck is opportunity and hard work. And while they may have all been the same letter, finding 100, starting with a decent target market of the biggest companies in the UK and going to all of them suggests that, I guess, that drive as well. It sounds like academics wasn't your thing, but hard work might have been when you were younger. I'm not saying it's not now, but
I'll use another word, being practical. Everything to me has always been about finding a practical way to do something. I guess going to those 100 was the easiest thing because it's a ring fence box, isn't it? I probably wouldn't have known where to go if we went below that 100, if I'm honest. And as much as I was sitting on the periphery of a very, very big city, or one of the probably third biggest city in the world, I wouldn't have known how you go door knocking to kind of go, please give me a job. And I knew my academic results weren't great enough to get me the job, so I had to find some way of doing it.
Well, and it's funny because you say it might not have worked now, but almost you've now, with the power of LinkedIn, you've got to our conversation at lunch, just connecting and then DMing someone with your special offer for a new thing isn't going to work. But actually, the amount of people you can now reach, for anyone listening who's maybe in a similar boat, that's probably the way for them to approach it. Or
so I would say you've got to stand out in some way, haven't you? I think if you take something from the base point of academic grades seem the same for everyone. Everyone's turning up with 9 A stars, okay? Therefore, there's no differentiator between those. Yes, the big houses, the big companies will take an intake each year based on that. But then there are an awful lot of people who don't fit into that space. And you've got to find a way of standing out in the crowd. And we've all seen the individuals stood outside the tube stations in Canary Wharf handing out CVs. In LinkedIn, you see people kind of saying, look, I really need something. I need a favor. And if they've got the right network, before you know it just explodes. You can read the comments, and before you know it, you've got 5 people just saying, mate, give me a call. Well, great. They've stood out. They've done something different. It doesn't work for everybody, though. So you've got to find you, and you've got to find your way into it. I think as we come through school, through university, we're indoctrinated to go and drift towards the big companies, or maybe that was just me. I don't know. But there are far more companies out there, aren't there? Far, far more.
Oh, definitely. And we'll talk later about sort of the difference between big and small and the pros and cons of both. I'm keen to actually fast forward quite a lot here to Project One. Could you actually share, you mentioned that you'd been sort of contracting for quite a while before, you knew Terry from that time in your previous career, but could you share actually how that opportunity came about? And I guess at the same time, what led you to take it, having been a contractor for so long? Because this is a consulting podcast. Many people who listen to this will know, if you've been contracting for a long time, it becomes a lifestyle, a long-term career choice. It's not as common to see people do that for a long time and then go back into a consultancy. So how that came about and what led you to say yes?
So I guess there's different types of contractors. And in my mind, I wasn't a jobbing contractor. I went into it through a very known client that I'd worked with and kind of transferred across in-house, did another 2 or 3 years with them. At that point in time, if I think back, it was kind of at the point where London had been appointed for the Olympic Games, and I was desperate to get to that. With my sporty background, I was like, I've got to work on that. I knew a lot of Deloitte consultants that had got involved in it, but that unfortunately didn't work out. And then at the same time, the whole Lloyds HBOS integration came about on the back of the finance collapse. And again, through a network connection contact, we had a coffee, and I just kind of said I would love to do that. And that conversation did bear fruit. And before I knew it, I did 2 years doing the integration. I did a straight 2 years then doing simplification of the bank. And by the time I'd finished those 2 or 3 things, that was in effect 10 years, ironically. And so in the middle of that, Terry and I had actually worked together. He was my program director. I was his program manager. We got on like a house on fire. I've said it before, in your phone, there are 5 people. If any of them rang and said, I'm putting a team together, your answer is just yes. And he's one of them. And so Terry had joined Project One a few years before. He had gone in to set up kind of the London and the South East division, and he was chasing all the time. Come on, come and join, come and be part of this team. And I made him a promise as soon as Lloyds HBOS had finished, give me a bit of time to sleep and I'll come across. And I did. But as much as I say, you'll always say yes, you've got to understand what you're joining. And therefore, I kind of knew a little bit about Project One because we had used them when we worked together as customers. Therefore, I knew that it was a very senior team, no juniors. I knew that you had some very, very intelligent people who were very practical and just wanted to get on and make change happen, which was great. So the ethos of what the company stood for was good for me. I also knew it was a boutique and an SME. And I'd worked out quite a few years beforehand that I didn't want to go into a big consulting house. It doesn't suit my personality type. I like to have a little bit more free reign and to actually be part of making something better, making something good, creating something and taking it in a different direction.
I mean, that obviously, and we might touch on networking later, James, because I think there's probably a lot in there. But obviously that sounded like a great opportunity for you. And that fact you knew Terry and that personal connection was really big. I guess, was there anything within that role that made you say, yeah, this is what I want to do? What was it? Was it simply the relationship, or was there sort of other elements of that conversation that made you feel, yeah, this is going to give me the sort of long-term career goals I want as well?
Probably a bit of the latter. So I don't think I would have come across if it was just to carry on kind of being a consultant. So, Terry and I had talked openly about what his aspiration was about growing what was that London and South East division at the time. And it was about, not just necessarily doing what we'd always done, but looking to do it for bigger companies, bigger PLCs, bigger firms, and really start to grow. Because Project One had kind of been born out of the Northwest and had a very, very solid kind of footprint up in the north and northwest. And it was really about how do you bring that down to the shiny lights of London. It'd obviously been doing that for few years at the point where I joined. And it really was about, how could I help? How could I bring my style, my network, my connections into that and help with the growth? So I guess as you were alluding to, it was more about that opportunity to move into company leadership rather than program leadership, but in a way that you could combine the both. So to this day, I am still a customer-facing CEO. I was a customer-facing director of consulting services. I will always be customer-facing. I cannot see a world where I'd be sitting in an office somewhere looking at everyone else doing it. I have to be out there. I have to be working in it. I have to be engaged with those customers. I'm an annoying, talkative person. I don't do documents. So it was really that opportunity to play a bigger role in shaping how a company could grow.
I mean, that sounds really like a really interesting opportunity to be a part of. And I guess there's also an element of you're joining a growing team. There's a incumbent leadership team either in the southeast or in the whole business. And actually, So what was that like in almost, you're coming in with Terry to grow this team, but I suspect there were also people already at your level or above, but also people below who may have been like, that was going to be my position, and bloody hell, who's this bloke who's just come in? That may not have been the case, but yeah, what was that like? And if it did create any tension, sort of how did you and Terry manage that?
I don't know if it's tension, but yes, all of what you've just said is true. There were incumbent people there. There were regional teams. There was a North team. There was a Scotland team at the time. 3 managing directors, in effect 3 teams, different sizes, different scales. But Project One always has and will continue to be fed from within. So we don't recruit externally into senior leadership, kind of into the roles. It's really people come up through the ranks, move into those positions. And in effect, it's kind of self-selecting in that way, isn't it? Because the people who want to go down that particular track will drift to that particular track. The ones who don't will just stay with doing delivery, doing what they do best and what they love. It was the fact that the company always has been and will continue to be independent. So again, you've got no paymaster sitting above in a group level trying to get you to sell other products and all that kind of stuff. You just stick to what you do best, deliver your core product of project and program management or change management. And so it didn't really feel like there was a tension. It was just about, at that point in time, how do you grow this particular part of it? Further down the track, when Ian Hellens, the original owner-founder, retired at the back end of 2016, we took the decision to, in effect, fold the 3 regions into one and just become a national company. Because ultimately, if you're looking after Virgin Media in Hook in Hampshire and you're looking after Virgin Media in Wythenshawe in Manchester, it's still the same company. You don't need people battling over, county lines. And so it was about, how do you simplify an SME business? How do you actually look to make the most and maximize the opportunities out of an SME business, a boutique business? How do you look to go after the next big customer client opportunity? How do we look to grow the size and scale of the programs, the transformations that we're working on, the duration of those? And all of that was just kind of fizzing around my head. And, having run big programs in the past, you were really just doing the same thing, but just with a different agenda.
I'd be interested in actually digging into that, because one of the things I was keen to ask you, and I think it's a great segue to do it, is, and I'm going to probably offend a whole load of contractors here when I do this, is another element of the sort of long-term contractor archetype is they're very good program managers, but I've rarely seen many that have moved across to consulting successfully because of the gamut of other skills and things you need to do. And you just said it there. You had this fizzing, how can we grow the business? And for you, it was a program. But I guess I'd love to almost understand how you made that transition. Have you always naturally had that entrepreneurial side to your mindset? Or was it has it been that just the same thinking in terms of projects and programs, but applying it to a different focus? What I guess back then and still enabled you to make that shift into consulting that, I've seen a lot of contractors struggle with at those senior levels?
I guess if you look at the different phases, I did in-house roles for the first chunk. Then I went to consulting for a chunk with a big BPO, and therefore you get a certain mindset driven into you about how you run the economics of a BPO or of a program, of an implementation. I then kind of went back, as you said, into that small contracting phase, but on supersized programs, which ironically, those programs and their budgets and the size of resourcing is probably bigger than most firms in the country. And then back into consulting. So it's not like I'd come straight out of one and into the other for the first time. It was just kind of going round a repeating loop. I think on your point about you don't often see it, I think there are plenty of good examples of people who have made that transition, but it is a mindset thing. And depending on what mindset that individual has will determine how successful they can be in that way. To go a little bit further, my brain is wired in pictures and processes. And I don't know whether that's learnt, taught, or genetic. I can't walk into a coffee shop without kind of going, all right, this process is broken, it doesn't work. Or, an airport security system, and kind of go, if you only did this, this, or this, it would all flow much better. And therefore, it doesn't matter what the context is, whether you're talking about a project, a program, a transformation, a client, a customer, our own business. I'm always looking to make things better.
I love that. And you mentioned, I'm going to ask about it because you mentioned there are plenty of examples and it's a mindset thing. for those who, like yourself, who have made that transition successfully, what is that mindset thing? And I'm thinking this for anyone listening who's contracting at the moment, thinking, I'd love to be back in consulting. I'd love to go into consulting. What is that mindset shift that is needed, or that mindset that's needed to succeed in that transition?
An inherent desire to want to build something, to grow something, to own something. And I don't mean own in terms of ownership, as in just owning the solution and actually trying to get something. We all spend our lives doing that for customers, for clients, turning, functions, products, processes inside corporates into something better. This is just doing exactly the same. And whilst you're doing that, in parallel, do it to yourself. You could badge it as entrepreneurial. You could badge it as all sorts of things. But I think it is just I've always wanted to do that. I didn't ever grow up kind of thinking I want to own my own business. That never came into my mind. It really is just a case of follow the natural flow of the river, go where it wants to take you. Apart from sitting there saying I want to write to the 100 FTSE companies, I've always then kind of done however many years and gone, right, where next? I've not, as I said, I didn't go into a big four and kind of go, right, I'm joining the grad scheme and I'm going to be here until I'm a senior partner. That never appealed at any point in my career.
Yeah, and I think that point just around that constant learning, constantly pushing yourself. I think given your story about your business with your friend at school, I think you're doing yourself a disservice to say you weren't always entrepreneurial or wanted to run your own businesses. But I think coming back to that, because it is the journey, like you say, in terms of how you joined Project One and sort of the vision that yourself, Terry, and the team had for it. Where in that journey did the conversations around becoming the CEO come? Where is that something that was quite early as an idea or potential? Was that something that came quite late? Sort of, tell me. Just at that point, Terry was CEO. Where did the conversations about handing the baton on come into that?
I think things just evolve through time, don't they? Because no matter who you are, if you come into a company, you've got to prove yourself. You've got to prove that you can do what that company wants you to do, what it needs you to do, that you can help it in some way or shape or form. So in effect, the focus at that point originally was just like, how do you grow London and the South East? At the point where Terry became CEO at the back end of 2016, it was like, how do we, create one team, one set of clients for the country? It was then about, ironically, I think we were 16, 17 years old at that point in time. And I remember the conversation of, this feels a little bit like you're doing your A-levels. And it was kind of like, right, you know that you're going to keep doing the same kind of thing, but what do you want to be when you come out of university? So in 5 years' time, what do you want to be? Now, you could read that and kind of go, well, how do we grow up? If you want to, how do we professionalize? How do you take a phenomenal business that Ian and Phil had started 16, 17 years ago, who were the true entrepreneurs, who broke away from Barclays and Capgemini to create the firm? How do you then take it to the next level? How do you grow? Now, grow means so many different things, and there is no one statement that says what that is to anyone. But it was about how do we take it to the next level, the next generation. And I guess even when I sit here today, Terry just retired this summer, that's now my mindset as well. It's like, right, how do I go to the next generation? And I guess, how do I prove to Terry that I've taken it further? And I don't need to, but that's just the way my brain is wired, is what's next? What's better? What would better be? Is it revenue? Is it profit? Is it headcount? It doesn't matter what. Is it customers? Is it clients? Is it globalization? It doesn't matter. We've just got to sit there and go, what does that 5-year agenda look like?
And so was that transition from Terry's, was that was built into that sort of 5-year picture, was it? Or
yeah, probably somewhere along the way. I don't know if there was a specific one day, one conversation. I think, as with anything, it doesn't matter what you look at in life. Even football clubs. What makes them appoint the next manager 3 days after they've got rid of the last one? Why do some of them choose to go external? Why do some go internal? Our view, as I said, is always to promote from within. You couldn't recruit into that role from an external. Well, you probably could, but we wouldn't. And therefore, you kind of look around, don't you, all the time. So as you said, there was an incumbent leadership team, probably 14, 15 people, even when I joined. And everyone makes their own choices. Some have gone on to set up their own firms. Others have gone on back into industry to do other things. Some have retired. And there was just a kind of a natural, as I said, flow of the river where it kind of, I guess, flowed my way. The transition itself, we've been planning that for at least the last 3 years, because you can't just chuck someone the keys and say, good luck, get on with it. I'll see you later. We wanted to be very open. We wanted to communicate to everyone in the team. We wanted to reassure everyone where we're going. We have, the bank and everyone else are involved. It's not a simple simple kind of day-to-day process. It was well mapped out, and there was a perfect, one ramp down and one ramp up, and you overlap each other in the same way as you do if you're swapping a program director, in a customer environment.
Well, and you've taken me to my next question, because again, I think you're one of the first guests I've had on where there has been that transition. I've had a lot of guests from partnerships where a managing partner is elected or moves on, but the partnership structure is a different model. And you alluded to it there. And if this are things you can't talk about, just sort of stop me and we'll move on. But actually, I'd love to dig into the details of what that transition looked like. To your point, it's not a car. You can't just go, right, here's the keys and now you drive it. Actually, how did you approach that? And what were, I guess, the big areas that you needed to manage the most carefully to ensure that transition worked effectively? And I'm asking this for anyone who might be going through this themselves.
Communication, that will always be number one. And I think open and honesty is closely linked and the second. I've always been a firm believer that people can deal with any information you give them so long as you give them all the information. If you leave grey areas in amongst the story, people will make up their own part of the story and it will go off in all sorts of directions. Sometimes not good. Therefore, if I looked at, let's say, the 12 months prior to Terry retiring, it was very coordinated. So we do monthly all hands videos. Terry used to kind of lead a lot of them. We just kind of over time, he did less, I did more. If we were doing Christmas events or summer events, again, whoever's kind of standing up and doing the keynote would change through time. And therefore, in a way, you're subliminally swapping the people without making a big noise about it. And then we got to 4, 5, 6 months out, and then kind of formally kind of sat there together on a video to the whole team and said, here's the world's worst kept secret. Terry is retiring and James is going to take over. But again, it's no news at that point in time because you are just getting on and doing it. I think it helps the fact that I am customer facing and that I still own my own client accounts, and I still to this day do. Therefore, it's very much seen as, I know the business, I work in the business, I'm still selling for the business, I'm still delivering for the business.
And I really like you say that, well, both the story point, because you are quite right, the ability for Chinese whispers to manifest and it's amazing sometimes where that goes. And that obviously talks to the intern. I guess you mentioned obviously you're client facing. I guess, how did you approach the client side? Because again, in some ways, I'm guessing here, but some clients might be concerned, okay, Terry's leaving, what does that mean? Some clients might think, well, James was my client lead, now he's the CEO, will I ever see him? Some clients might have thought, I didn't want to see James, but now he's the CEO, I really want to see him. How did you manage that side of things, again, to make sure the clients were sort of as calm as the team?
In exactly the same way. So full communication. Every customer within those client organizations that we worked with or had worked with in the near past were all personally emailed. For those on the active accounts, we individually managed the conversations from the account directors into those customers. A lot of those customers know who I am anyway, because I've in that previous role, I kind of was around a bit. People saw me, people knew who I was. And as you said, you get all sorts. You get the ones that never wanted to see you before and suddenly like, oh, I'd like to meet. And then you go, oh, okay, I've only changed the job title. But no, the key thing for me and for us was, continuity. Just keep doing what you're doing because we do it well. You steady the ship. You don't make any drama over it. It is a no news story. We're doing what we've done in effect for the whole 25 years, which is hand the company down, if you want to call it that. And it is internal. So again, there's not a new person turning up who's untried, untested. No one knows. It's all very much it's just James.
Was there anything that either didn't work as well as you'd hoped in that transition, or maybe a better question is, looking back, is there anything you would have done differently, with that benefit of hindsight?
Ironically, no, because I think we are both scenario people. So I run everything through hundreds of scenarios in my head. If I'm on a train and you think I'm staring, I'm not. I'm just I'm just thinking of 1,000 scenarios, and therefore we'd kind of run it to death over a pretty decent period of time. I think if you stick to those basics of get the communication right, be as open and honest as you can, then you don't end up with those awkward Q&A sheets that, we all love to hate. And again, pick your time as to when is the right time, how early to kind of formalize it versus what you want to do in the background, because there is plenty you can do in the background long before you get to any announcement.
I love the point about scenarios. It's, I listened to a podcast where they talk about the military in the US. They call it red teaming, where they all get in a room and basically lob, worst case scenarios at each other. And it sounds like in your case, that's the thing that let you say, well, you've got these 1,000 different worst cases, and actually, if you deal with them up front, you're probably going to be okay in the actual sort of execution, as it were.
Absolutely, plan for the worst, ready for the best.
And I'm assuming, because you talked about treating it like a project, I'm assuming there was a plan. There was a
very, very detailed plan. I mean, both of us, again, Terry and I, are both fastidious about program governance and the reason it should exist. And I know people are binary as to whether they do or don't like it. I guess from the size and scale of the programs we've been involved in, it's a must-have. And therefore, if you just apply the same discipline to this activity, it serves the same purpose, which is it just keeps you true, keeps you honest. Everyone knows where you are. You know what needs to be done. You know what you're running late on. You know what you need to do next. And it just flows, and it makes life really simple. There's always something goes wrong. It is like a project, isn't it? Things go wrong. Just, deal with it. The scenario thing is because you are always in a program or project world, sat there trying to understand what's going to happen today, tomorrow, next week, next month. How are you going to mitigate stuff? How are you going to recover stuff? You just, over 25, 30 years, you just train your brain to just scenario.
I'll ask this just in case, and to be honest, we might cut it out if it goes nowhere, but the transition all went well. Obviously, there's an interesting period post-transition where Terry is no longer there. So you some of those scenarios I expect had, he'll step in or you'll step in. Actually, I think you said he left 6 months ago. Is that right?
Left in the summer. So end of June.
Yeah. So few less, I guess. Has there been anything in those last few months where you thought, we didn't plan for this, or we didn't think about this, maybe other than a global recession? But
timing is everything. No. It's weird though, isn't it? If you think about it from the timing point of view, if you go back and look at the 5-year window or the 3-year window, go to the 3-year, and that's the start of Brexit, and then hot footing it straight into COVID. And then obviously we kind of pin the end of COVID as kind of Q1 this year. Terry left at the end of Q2, as you said, just ahead of whatever is about to happen. But at the same time, we planned and kind of mastered our way through all of those events in exactly the same way. A lot of communication, a lot of planning, a lot of scenarios. Would I do it different? Has anything happened? No. I think we are in that weird zone that you talked about, the post exit. It's very strange because, as you said, part of you kind of thinks, he's just got on holiday. Part of you kind of goes, he's not coming back. Part of you is there kind of going, I've lost my best friend. I've lost my kind of sounding board. And at the same time, you also know that people don't always then talk to you in the same way as they would have done beforehand, because they're second guessing as to what they say and what it might mean. So there's a whole raft of emotions going on. I think by the time you get, let's say, to year end, I think that's kind of a nice marking point. So when you come back at the beginning of January, that's the true start of the new world. This is transition, Q3, Q4. And then it's kind of, it's new world order from January. But in reality, on the day-to-day and the ground, nothing's different. We just carry on. It's funny, isn't it? Because again, if you go back to the fact we're an SME, we're a boutique, there's 120 people. The consultants are all of a senior level. Therefore, you're dealing with a very different cohort. You're not having to deal with a full pyramid and a bunch of fears, concerns, emotions that may exist elsewhere. They're just not there. In effect, I'd say some of the people were just like, yeah, whatever. It's just leave me. Let me get on with my job. Because we've built a firm for grown-ups. There's no balanced scorecards. There's no quarterly reviews. It is very much, we all know what we need to do. We've all got our part to play. Let's just go and play it.
I'm going to ask about that because it's a model I've not actually heard many use. And I guess to your point, on the one hand, it gives freedom for people to be grown-ups. You do your job well, you will progress, you will be rewarded. We're actually at the moment thinking about our approach to this. So I'm being very selfish here, James. How do you make that work? I guess in terms of when someone is great, it's obvious and there is no need for a balanced scorecard or a performance review. Where someone may not be performing to the level you expect or the level you want, or as is quite common in consulting, because people are ambitious, the person thinks they're performing better than you think they're performing. So there's a conversation about progression and pay rises. How do you manage that? How do you approach those conversations at a firm?
Very easily, but I'm not going to pretend I was the architect of it all, because this obviously is steeped in 24, 25 years of history. Again, going back to Ian and Phil and how they set the business up, which was in effect an element of genius, because the consultants are rewarded for delivery. And if you take that in its purest form, where their work, their behavior, their level and skill is rewarded, and you keep that nicely cocooned, you can actually have a really straight relationship. So as you said, things go wrong, right? In programs, in customers, in personalities. But if you've actually set the expectations right from the get-go, so from recruitment around how we operate, how we work, what that behavior set is, how we expect every kind of cohort to play together in the playground, it becomes really simple. Because if something goes wrong, you just have a nice conversation. It's gone wrong. Let's understand why. If things go wrong repeatedly, then you're having a different conversation, but it's a conversation for grown-ups. It's that walk around the block kind of, come on, let's have a chat. What's going on? Why is this happening? And you're not needing a scorecard. You're not needing a bunch of HR kind of policies, procedures. You're just talking to someone who is the same level experience of yourself, similar age, and just having a chat, which is good because it takes the barriers down, doesn't it? But you have to set it up from the start. But again, you go back to the model is really only bringing in the very experienced people. They may have been the North Star in another firm, and they come here and they go, oh, hang on a minute, there's 100 North Stars, which is interesting in itself, because they then collaborate, communicate in a very, very different way to the way they would have done in some of the big firms they came from. But we've created a home for people who, in effect, have come to, this sounds terrible, they've come to the end of their journey in those big houses. They don't want to become senior partners or partners over there. They want to do what they do best, which is deliver big, messy, ugly programs with big companies. And we've created that as a client base, customer base, and a consulting cohort that all come together just to do just that. Small teams. We're putting in 2, 3, 4, 5 people into a project or a program. You may have anything from 1 to 10, in a client. But again, they've all got fully empowered roles to deliver at a high level generally into an exec board of a big PLC or a big global. So it all comes together, but you've got to set it out from the day they walk in for that interview. You've got to tell them how it is, because that's not how everybody likes it. Some like balanced scorecards, believe it or not.
Well, and I think your point there around that, just honest, it all starts with that honesty and openness. Like you say, if you're clear about their expectations, and I guess also clear who that works for and who it doesn't, you should filter out those it doesn't before they get through the door, and you end up with those it does. And I do in a minute want to turn to your point around this sort of the difference between big and small, and also who they suit, because I think implicit in there, and you said it about yourself, some people suit big firms, some people suit small, and actually it's not around good or bad or right or wrong. It's different people, and I think also different stages in career. You mentioned a lot of your people may have had a good career in a big firm, and like you say, then the choices for progression are often management, partnership, leadership, which is not necessarily what everyone wants to do. I think there's, like most things in life, there's a bit of a misnomer that everyone wants to become a partner, and there's a lot of people who like being fantastic program managers because there's a lot of big programs out there. And I guess, how do you see that sort of as you run an SME, a boutique firm, kind of what drew you to that end of the market, and what is it that when you're sort of speaking to candidates, team members, customers, for you is that differentiator? What should someone think about? Why join a boutique over a big firm, let's say?
So might jump around a little bit here, but if you go back to when Project One started in 1998, there was probably very few boutiques. It was all the big firms, whether it was big consulting, big tech, it was all the big guys that pretty much had most of the market. Wind forward to where we are today, I don't know what there are, 200-300, maybe more boutiques in the consulting business in the UK. A good number of senior partners will have left the big houses and created their own. And it's therefore far more acceptable to kind of have a boutique market. Now, again, even in the boutique world, it then splits, doesn't it? You've got the true SMEs, and I don't mean SME by size, but your skill set SMEs who want to be a specific thing. They could be there to do, SAP or ERP, and that's all they're about. But I think what that has opened up in having all these boutiques is a completely different channel, different market for people to move into. And as you said, it'll be different reasons for different people. Not everyone does suit the big firms. They are so big that you can get lost in them. The politics is very different. The empowerment is very, very different. The economics and the way that's managed and the way the clients are managed, totally different. You come to that boutique end and it's very much you feel like you are part of the company. It is more family than it is corporate. You know everyone. I have a personal view in my head that, 120 to 150, you will know everyone that's there one way, shape or form. You know who to call. You know how to get an answer to something. And I think people choose to go there. And there's a question I ask in interviews, which is, are you ready to give up the brand name? If you walk into a pub and someone says, who do you work for? And you say, I work for one of the, these big four, everyone goes, oh, yeah, great. But if you walk in and say, I work for Project One, are you going to worry when they go, who are Project One? They need to have kind of got to that stage where they're willing to make that transition. You'd be surprised how many don't, and they don't realize it until they're in that interview having that question. It's funny because people think that the remuneration will be vastly different. It's not. It's in fact, it will probably pay better than some of the big houses because of the way that it's structured. It gives you options. So again, you don't have to be on a partner track. You can just do delivery. We want everyone to play their part though. So business development, you don't have a target. That doesn't mean you don't have to do it. You still have to be there, working with your client, your customer, looking for opportunities, that are there for us to help that customer even further. It's that symbiotic relationship that kind of enables us to keep going and keep growing. It's about building networks, connections, conversations. So again, you go back to that grown-up thing. Generically, grown-ups are very good at having conversations, which we all weren't when we were in our 20s. Let's be honest, right? We were as scared of talking to C-suite back then as anyone is now. You learn that trade, don't you? That skill as you go through life. And so again, you're asking your senior team to go and talk to their senior customers about how can Project One help, but on our size and scale, not pulling a bus up with 50 people getting out.
No, I think some really good points there, James. Just because it piqued my interest, and I love practical advice on this show. Your interview question I thought was a really good one because it's funny you say it because I remember when I worked in consulting, there was a friend of a friend who was looking to leave one of the big houses. And that actually was exactly the problem. He loved everything else when I was telling him about the firm I worked for. He loved everything else, but the fact that the name was not as big as the name he had been at, actually almost even to the detriment of his career, the speed he wasn't being progressed fast enough, but because he had that badge, that was the blocker. There may not be many other specifics like that, but are there any other questions you or your team use to kind of weed out whether someone is right for either Project One or a boutique firm in general?
Our particular one, I can't comment for others, is are they comfortable giving bad news? So we've always had a firm belief that, things go wrong in projects and programs. That's just fact. The quicker you declare that, the quicker you talk about it, the quicker you can look at ways to mitigate it or recover it, the better for everyone. So it goes straight back to that open and honest communication. That's not the case across the whole industry. And I think hence you've got to get into that in those interview conversations, which is just, you need to be able to go and tell the customer that the dog is unwell. What do you want to do kind of thing. And again, because if you then link it back to that, we're independent. I'm not trying to sell any other product, hardware, software, licenses, tools, anything. It makes it a really clear-cut conversation. There's no hidden agenda. We're just here to run your program for you and to get the best outcome. Therefore, we'll tell you when there's problems and we'll work with you to collectively come up with the answer. But again, that's not everyone's cup of tea. But again, you come back to why do people leave the big firms at that point in their career to come to an SME? Because you have the ability to deliver those big programs in a more empowered way than you probably ever have done before. But it also allows you, if you want to go into more of the account management, business development side, you can do. If you want to get to the leadership team, you can do. It's not a big mountain that you know everyone. There's no need to even say there's an open door policy because there's no doors. It's just go and have a chat. Everyone's phone number's on the phone. Just dial it. Have a conversation. Work out, how we could work together to take you wherever you want to go. Conversely, though, we've got a flat organisation. There is a support team in our head office in Holmes Chapel in Cheshire who look after, everything to do with finance, HR, people, marketing, IT. Then you have a cohort of consultants. They all only have one job title, consultant. There is a leadership team, which is, the account directors. and then there is an SLT, and that's it. And it makes it really simple. So again, you go back to another sub question off that interview. Are you happy with the fact you're going to be called a consultant? Now, their mind immediately jumps back to when they were 22 and they were called a consultant. And they go, hang on a minute, I've gone from consultant, I've gone senior, I've gone senior manager, I've gone principal. And it's like, yeah, forget all of that, because you're not 22 anymore. You're a consultant. And no one really cares, in a sense. Your clients are not buying you because of your grade. So there's no grades. There's no job titles. It really just undoes everything. There's no one clamoring over the top of anyone to try and get to another level, another pay rise or anything else. It's just really simplified.
You've actually just answered something else I had on my list, which was exactly that, James. And this is probably going to be something, almost finger in the air, but my guess would be that is more of a shock to people than the badge. And I'd be interested. So when you have these interviews, on average, do they get more surprised at the big four to small question, or do they get more surprised by that one? Because I do think in our industry, a bit like the car you drive or used to drive, a lot is wrapped up in grade, because you can, it's a subtle it's a subtle proxy for salary and experience. And so how do you find people, is that a shock for people? Is that a good test of whether they're a Project One person or not? How does that land?
I think when you piece all of the puzzle together, they get it. The two that we previously discussed are the ones that really make the difference as to whether they will decide to make that jump or not. But in general, when you describe the whole ecosystem and how it all hangs together, they really get it, and they really get it fast. Yes, there is the same transition that we talked about earlier on. They'll come in, and the first 3, 6, 9, 12 months will be like, is this real? Is it real? And it's like, oh, hang on a minute. Oh, yep, no, it is. And then as soon as you go past that, it's just like, crack on. But I totally get why people are skeptical, right? And I totally get why people go, what do you mean I'm just a consultant? You can see it on their LinkedIn. They'll join and they'll still put director, And then after a while...
I've seen a few, not necessarily your firm, but I've seen others where it's brackets as well. It's like bracket, senior manager level. I've
seen all of this. So it's funny, as you said, you'll see it in that first year where they'll have a different title. And then after that, you'll just see it just disappear, because they've realized that it's not a status symbol anymore. There's no need for it to be. And it's in effect undoing what they've been subliminally taught.
I think it's a really interesting point. Like you say, I think there's across all walks of life, things that just get assumed and therefore done. So everyone assumes you should have grade structures in consulting. And actually, your point of let's change. Well, your predecessors, they didn't do that, and it has led to a successful model for yourselves. And I think particularly for anyone listening in those boutiques, also an interesting lesson in there as well, because it does, like you say, I imagine it saves a lot of the politics around. Well, am I a senior manager, a manager? There seems to be subgrades within grades now, sort of junior, senior manager,
but you can take it further forward though, and you do it, as you said, if you flatten as much as you possibly can, it's better for everyone. Then you don't have to think about, I want to work on a certain account because that's perceived to be better than that account. Again, you can do away with all of that. It doesn't matter whether this program is being led by Janet, supported by John, and then the next one's led by John, supported by Janet. Because again, there's no grades. It's just, we're here to do a job. Who's the best placed person? And we have stuff even on teams where amongst themselves they'll go, we came in with the view that I'll run it and you'll support it. But 3 months in, we're like, oh, this doesn't make sense. It actually would be better the other way. And we'll just flip it. And no one will mind. It's just a common sense. I think you used the phrase, just get it done. The job is to get the stuff done. It's not about creating PowerPoint decks. It's not about trying to sell multi-million-pound sell-ons. It's just about getting that program done for that customer. And if our job is to kind of put in a very small team to sit across the top of all the other teams, then we know what the agenda is. It will run for 1, 2, 3, 4 years. We will be wired into that business. Half the time, they probably don't know it's Project One in a good way, because it's just, you're part of the fabric.
I'm going to have to ask it so that people don't just think I'm blowing smoke for you and Project One, but are there any complications that it has caused at that flat model? And if so, what are they and how have you navigated them?
It doesn't cause problems, no. But again, you've got to be open and honest from the start, because there isn't a career ladder, because you've just taken it all away. So in effect, you've got consultant doing delivery, you've got account directors managing accounts. If people want to move between those two worlds in either direction, by the way, we've had both, it is fully available in effect to everyone, anyone. But as you said, in that interview process or in those early days, it's like, where is the career steps? Where are we going? But again, once people kind of see it and understand it and have worked in it, it becomes pretty self-evident.
Great to hear. I won't dig any further on that then, James. I actually, you touched on how, the boutique market has changed, and you're right. When Project One was founded, I wasn't working quite by that point, but there was a lot less consulting firms, and now there are a lot of boutiques. You've been in the industry for a long time, and I guess I'd love to get your thoughts on how else do you see it's changed? You mentioned the number of firms, but actually consulting as a career, as a profession. What have been those big shifts over that time?
I'd go at it the other way. I think fundamentally now it's more about project and program delivery, and I'm not too sure whether that was always the way. I think
as opposed to sort of
advisory, if I use that word, there's less advisory and more implementation these days, but on a scale, isn't there? I mean, the number of people in the industry is just vast compared to 25, 30 years ago. I think there's very clear demarcation lines between the strategy houses, the BPO houses, the tech houses, and the delivery implementation kind of side. Every now and again, we all try and blur them, and then every now and again, they just reset themselves. I think the contract market is vastly bigger than it ever was, because a lot of in-house teams were let go. And therefore, your customers have got wider choice. I think in days gone by, you probably saw a lot of pyramid teams, and now it's a multi-universe. In effect, you've got multi-vendor landscapes in the big programs, in the big corporations, and that's good. We should all work together, because we're not. Yes, we are competing against each other, but in some ways we're not. There's no direct competitor to some of the big houses, and there's no direct competitor to a Project One. We've probably got the biggest cohort of out-and-out program directors and program managers that are available to those customers 5 days a week. Because in a big house, you wouldn't. You'd be doing sales, leadership, and other things for a percentage of it. So it enables clients, customers to put together an ecosystem where they can have the best of the best and build a multifaceted solution, which is good. I think it's good for the industry. I think that will continue to evolve, which can only be a positive thing for everyone. I think a lot of the customers are far more educated. They've worked with all these firms for so many years that they also know how to put those teams together.
It is an interesting point, like you say, that sort of proliferation and therefore combination. And we didn't talk about it at lunch, but funnily enough, I don't know if we would have crossed, and I was probably much further down the project than you were at the time. So I don't think we ever met, but I did also work on the project you worked on at Lloyds. I think I was only there for a couple of months. It was a office above a branch on Moorgate, and that
was me. Yes,
were you in there?
Yes, I took that whole thing. It hadn't been used since the 1970s, and we reopened the floors above the branch.
Well, after this, we're going to have to compare names to see if we did ever meet, because I was only on it for a very short stint, but I distinctly remember the office.
End-to-end simplification.
That was the one. It's, we'll talk more about that after this. But every time now, every time I go into the city to see friends, clients, etc., I always look up. It always takes me past that, and I always remember that office. So that's just
I remember putting plasterboard into that thing and throwing Wi-Fi routers in a corner. That's how.
Yeah, I don't remember it being the highest spec office I've ever worked in. I think I went straight from there to a banking organisation where they gave you free bottled water, and it was quite a stark shift. It was a different world, but yes, it is a small world. Like you say, that proliferation, though, I think. And also that there's an implicit element in what you just said around that almost abundance mindset, for want of a better name, of there are so many projects, programs, organizations. I think, and I'm guessing because I wasn't around, but I think there used to be a sort of, if I don't get it, someone else will, or if they get it, it's a win. It's always a zero-sum game. Whereas I think there's now so many projects going on, so many organizations who need help, and actually everyone can have a bit of that pie, like you say, and what you do is different to someone else, such that your team are great at, project and programs. Someone else is great at the other bit they do.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think if you go back and join some of those dots, let's take banking because it's an easy one to use as the case study. The vast in-house change and transformation teams are not the size and scale they used to be. In effect, they've let them go. They've let them go because they know they can go to the suppliers and buy it in and capex the cost, and therefore as you said, you can put together, go and get me the best PMO function, go and get me the best data analytics function, go and get me the best project and program leadership function, go and get me the volume, and you can cherry pick where you put that ecosystem together from. You can then do that by industry, knowing that there are some that specialize in telco and some that specialize in pharma. And again, you can put your solution together. I think there is then a generic overview of it all, though, which says, if you are good at project and program management, you're good at project and program management. It's a discipline in itself. The context, the industry, the sector is slightly agnostic. You just need to know how to run a program in a good way.
No, and like you say, that approach can then be used for everything from end-to-end simplification to changing CEOs, as we've touched on. And I'm intrigued by your answer to this, just because we're going to come onto your LinkedIn videos, and I like them because they're kind of direct to the point, and you say what you feel is true, and you say what you believe, and I always think that's a nice characteristic. And I guess to our conversation around sort of what is going on in the what's changed in the industry, I mean, is there anything in terms of beliefs or approaches that actually you disagree with in how most consulting firms run or how the industry runs? Or is there anything that you think our industry does need to change to react to kind of the world we live in today?
The biggest one for me is that collaboration one. I think there is still this crazy world where we are working with each other day in, day out in all these client organizations, but yet we don't actually try and work together. And I've never really understood it in some way. Most other industries would, if we just use the term subcontract in some way, shape or form, they would partner with each other to try and get the best solution for everyone. That really doesn't go on. There's still an element of, I can do all this myself. My team's better than your team. And I just kind of go, I wish we'd get over ourselves. I think the SME world will get there a lot faster than the big houses. And I mean that from consulting and tech. Because I think the SME world is very fast working out that if you could create a little ecosystem where, we could sit there and go, we use that firm for testing, we use that firm for PMO, we use that firm for data analytics, then we all get, to go to the party together. And in effect, we'll end up looking after ourselves in the SME market, which will then become more powerful, ironically, than, in some respects, than the big firms. Now, they may not see it that way. They might go, it's still an annoyance. But it doesn't need to be that way. We could do that across the whole industry and actually look to share it. We all move around as well, don't we? Let's be honest. People that have worked at multiple firms and multiple clients. It's a pretty small world.
I think it is a good point. And there's an element within that as well, I guess, to what you said around why people join Project One, they want to do project delivery, is actually by doing that, you also enable people to do the work they want to do. Because PMO, just because you mentioned it, is sort of, that has in certain firms always been a kind of proving ground for 21 to 25-year-old analysts. And actually some people love that. And if you're really
a particular PMO.
Well, it's been a long time since I've been a PMO, I won't. I'm not going to.
No, but that is part of, as you said, how has the world evolved, right? I hope this term isn't too bad, but the crank the handle element that you're talking about there, I understand, but there is a completely different top end to that now that I don't think existed in the past, but definitely is needed today, which is that whole PMO leadership. It's a value-based PMO. It's not a post box. It is the heart of your governance and control. It should independently be running that program. It should be holding everybody to account. You still are faced probably more often than the industry should be and the client industry should be, where you're trying to justify why you need that function rather than just saying this thing pays for itself in spades. So, that level of PMO, I think people could do a lot more with.
I think you know a lot more about PMO than I do, Jen, so I'm not even going to attempt to challenge or discuss on the variants. But I do think your point kind of reinforces what you're saying as well around the specialism, because you cannot have that world really unless there are firms that specialize in it. And so how do you hone, if you're in a firm where PMO isn't valued, you're never going to want to be a PMO for a long time. Actually, if there's a world, some people, like you say, they love it, they see the value of it. There is now a world where you can easily set up your own specialist PMO organization.
Who make, 8-figure numbers of revenue just out of PMO. And it is most definitely needed.
And I think, like you say, that's what I think as you touched on, is fascinating, seeing the specialism and then how to combine those. And it's interesting. Clients are the buyers and lead the decisions of the consulting firm. So if buyers are understanding this, the industry follows suit. Yeah, playing nice together. It's always been a challenge in the consulting industry. It's why I do this podcast. The lack of, I always think our industry is great at sharing inside, but doesn't share enough outside for, like you say, what is enough to go around, hopefully.
There's more than, I don't know how many businesses, companies, organizations, clients there are in this country, but my God, there's far more than we all need. And, the world has moved on. So customers also move far more regularly these days, and they don't just move internally, they'll be moving externally. They're not just moving within the same industry or sector, they're moving across, and they will always therefore have their relationships. So if you come back to that, this is a relationship-based industry. It's the relationships that if you invest the time into them will actually serve you the best. It's not the product. It's not a toolkit. It's that. It's about knowing those people so that when they move, they want to take you with them. And therefore, it's not always a lockout as it used to be where, here's the PSL, here's the ones that have got the MSAs. It's that firm in here and that firm over there. It doesn't play out that way anymore. It's very much I knew who I'd like. It's no different to, new football manager goes in. What's the first thing they say? I'm bringing my team. It's my coach, my physio, my trainer. You bring your team with you. I'd find it strange nowadays if a senior exec turned up in an organization and didn't have a team they want to bring. I'd find that very strange.
I feel it's a natural place to bring it in, because you mentioned it earlier, and I did say I would try and find us a place to talk about networking. I do, so I share all of the things you just said, and I agree with it. I guess thinking of how to help our audience, has networking always been something you've been good at before? No, brilliant.
Not even close.
That was the answer I was hoping for. You mentioned earlier in your 20s you couldn't talk to people, and then so what changed? Was it a course? Was it an epiphany? What was it that helped you go from someone who couldn't network to someone who can?
Awkward life learning. Yeah, I guess I'm an introverted extrovert, if there is such a thing. I have my shy side. I have my, drop me into a room of 100 people and I'm the guy standing in the corner not wanting to talk to anyone because you have your fears. And then there comes a point in time in your career where you kind of had no choice and you kind of got to embrace it and go for it. And I think everybody realizes that everybody else is generally as awkward as you are. So I think you have just got to throw yourself into it. You got to find your own level, your own style, your own approach. But it is massively important. I guess if I look back over my career, I probably should have worked that out earlier. Does anybody tell you it? No, not necessarily. But then I don't know if in the big firms you just get sheep dipped into a course somewhere. I don't know. I didn't. But it is invaluable because it's those relationships that really help you get on in your career, help you build customer relationships. And that is really at the heart of everything we do. It also helps you when things go wrong because you again, if you've got that open and trusted relationship, you can just, say there's something that's wrong and we've got to sort it out. And you just end up having that conversation rather than the horrible one, that's too late down the road where you're doing it too formally. So no, I would implore anybody kind of coming up through this career to just get into that sooner rather than later. Find their own way of doing it, though. Find their own style. Get to talk to people. Become inquisitive. There's a word that probably don't hear enough. Be inquisitive. There's no such thing as a stupid question because the chances are that whoever you're asking asked it at some point in time. We're not born with all this knowledge. And therefore, you just got to prod and poke and find your feet. Do a lot of it informally, though. I'm not talking about like networking events where you're going around with a badge on your lapel. I prefer on a floor, just getting to know people around the business. Even if you're not working directly with them, just get to know people. Practice your skill out there, by the water cooler, by the coffee machine, in the queues, just around the floor, talking to people that are sitting around you. In this day and age when no one has a desk, everyone's moving all the time. That's actually a little bit easier because people are sitting kind of going, I don't really know anyone around me. So if you just get chatting, you'll find everyone wants to chat with you. Which is probably some people's nightmare, having me near them chatting.
Well, no, I think it's a great point. And it reminds me, actually, one of my former guests sort of made this point of, it's the peers you're in the room with today who are the CEOs of tomorrow.
Oh, absolutely.
And actually, like you say, if people do move around within a small ecosystem, we mentioned banking where we were on that program. people tend to stay in banking, and they may go from retail bank to retail bank. But
that's one particular industry though where they do. There's most of the others aren't as colloquial.
Well, I guess the point's still around those people who you sat next to or chatted to at the water cooler at one firm may in 10 years' time be the CEO totally. Of another. And I also share I've been to enough shaky hand networking events. I think your point is quite good. It's ironic, actually. You mentioned, obviously you hadn't been on sort of a formal grad scheme. And I did do a formal grad scheme. As I was saying at lunch, I'm always your YouTuber who wraps the cars. I'm in awe because anyone who has an atypical career, I always think that sounds much more interesting than what I did. But I actually think a lot of these graduate schemes are part of the problem with what the cause of why people don't network, because you do get put on a course and you get taught that networking isn't a chat. It's, I've got to make sure my body language is the same. And I've got to do this sort of, complex dance of questions.
That's my worst nightmare, what you just described there.
They exist, and people make a lot of money training on them. But I think your point around just
be yourself. And also just, many listeners to this, I say many listeners, I'm making myself sound much more famous than I am. I have no fame, but I stopped drinking about 5 years ago. And actually it was exactly the same thing of, you go to a wedding and my problem used to be there's free booze, the food will catch up, and sometimes it didn't always catch up. But, you'd have a few drinks to get yourself calm because you sort of panic that everyone else is calm and you're the anomaly. And a bit like you were saying with networking, you very quickly realize everyone's uncomfortable just talking to strangers. And the only way, almost no one is born innately comfortable with it. You just get comfortable doing it, and it's just doing it. There are some that are naturally more comfortable at it and naturally better at it. Sometimes though, when you actually talk to them, they've still got fear. They've just learned a way of putting a barrier over it. I think, as you just described, sometimes you've got to get away from the work chat, because if you actually just start talking to the individual about the individual, life just, unravels. If you meet people near where you live, you don't start talking about work, do you? You talk about them and their life and what they're doing and the kids and the holidays and, life events. Do the same at work. You don't need to walk in and go, hang on a minute, let me talk to you about this presentation deck I happen to have sneakily hidden behind my back. Get to know them as an individual. If, they'll buy into you, then the rest actually just naturally follows. And like I said, there are people that were senior or lieutenants in that Lloyds world that then went on, that we've worked with at HSBC, that we've worked with at Metro, that the list is long. And it's those relationships that you've built up through those events that actually create, in effect, your pipeline, if you want to call it that, years later. And that program's 11 years ago, something like that now.
Yeah, no, it's a really key point. It reminds me, and I'll have to credit the person when I can remember who it is, but I listened to a podcast where the guest said they've deliberately stopped asking, the old "what do you do" question and replaced it with a slight change of "what do you do at the weekends?" What is your hobby? And I think, to your point, it gets people on something that isn't work. And for some people, they love work, and that's a really passionate thing for them. But for others, it's not.
Well, you blend the two, don't you? But you got to find a start point, and the start point, in my experience, and the way I do it, is not generally about talk me through how your product launches.
Tell me your project plan. Show me your Gantt chart. I'm sure.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
I want to walk around an office shouting. Maybe I don't want to walk around an office shouting, "Show me your Gantt chart," but it'd get you a reputation at least. So something else, and I know you're passionate about it. I know it's a big focus for Project One. It's a big focus for a lot of people in the industry at the moment. Is climate. And I'd just love to get your take on it and how you are approaching that climate agenda from a Project One perspective.
I'd like to say in our own way and slightly differently to others, because this goes back to something we touched on earlier. We are very clear about what we are here to do, what we're good at doing, and what we're not here to do and not good at doing. And fundamentally, we are very, very good at running projects, programs, and transformations. The whole climate agenda, if you look at it from a program and transformation point of view, is nothing more than that. There are a set of programs that need to run. There are a set of tasks that need to happen. There is an outcome that needs to be realized. And therefore, you will have heard me kind of make that quote of, why would anybody be doing change and transformation nowadays that doesn't have some form of contribution to that agenda? So that's not going anywhere near the geopolitical side of it. That's just, doing what we do day in, day out. And therefore, we've taken that approach into how we as Project One are are kind of positioning ourselves, which is, I'm not sitting there kind of with all of the data and the graphs and the what's going to happen to the world side. It's very much here's the top 10 things that we think any corporate should be looking at. These, therefore, are projects and programs. They need to sit inside your portfolio. They take X length of time to deliver and realize the benefit. Therefore, here's where they kind of fit. If you want to say that you're going to hit something by 2030, 35, 40, 50, it's a lot longer, obviously, than people think. But we are in a world where we're going on the journey. And as with any of these kind of adoption kind of journeys, you will have your fast adopters, you'll have your people that want to see how it's going before they get on board. There'll be different people who are able to put in different amounts of investment at this stage. But ultimately, we've all got to contribute to that kind of ultimate outcome. So we're very much sticking to the practical side. Let us show you where this sits in your world. There are plenty of other firms out there who are climate specialists, ESG specialists, carbon specialists. We can help you do the basics, and we can help you wrap all of that in. We can even help you find other firms to help you on all of those parts of it. But there is a very obvious list of topics, shall we say, within the agenda that just need to be done, and we just need to get on and do them.
And now you might tell me this is the Project One secret sauce you can't share, but you've mentioned a list of 10. I like lists and share as many or few as you want. But what are those? Maybe we start with, what are those top 3 that any corporate listening, but I assume they apply to other businesses?
They are the obvious.
They be?
There's no secret sauce, because all of that is, you put it into Google, you'll find it, because it is the obvious things. We know we've got to do stuff around buildings. Yeah, we know we've got to do stuff around transportation. So if you think of all the fleets, so BT's the biggest fleet in the country, Royal Mail, massive fleet in the country. We've got to look at data. We're in this weird world, aren't we? We create so much data. Companies are storing more and more data. We're getting bigger and bigger data centers. But in reality, you've got to cool a data center, and therefore that generates heat. And therefore, what do you want to do with it all? So there's one I regularly use. How or when was the last time you deleted a photo off your phone? I doubt ever. And yet every one of those is 4 meg. And every one of those is there and it's in the cloud. And all you do every time a certain fruit company says to you, your storage is nearly full, you click yes to the 99p more. I don't mind. But we've got to fundamentally change behaviors, haven't we? So, it doesn't matter whether you're looking at it from a personal level or a corporate level. The question's the same. We keep finding better things to do with data. Therefore, the data analytics world gets bigger. But the more that we store, the more problem we've got. So what do we do with that? So there's my 3, but there are many, 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 many more in that top 10.
Well, and I think that last one, and you're quite right, because and I'm going to please nobody I hope there's no backlash from this, but I like the fact I can see the first photo I ever took on an iPhone. It was my 22nd birthday party with some friends. But I think that last point is also really interesting, because you're quite right. And I've heard someone, and again, I'm throwing out lots of stats that I can't quite qualify, but something like Netflix is one of the biggest polluters, or polluters because of, like you said, the data centers to store all of the films, etc., for people to use. And I think it's an interesting one, to your point, in that top 3, because people often think, I don't know, fossil fuels, and they think transport, but rarely do they think data. And actually, data has become sexy to talk about big data and more data, when, like you say, actually there's probably things you could have less data, and it doesn't feel like it has an impact on your screen because it's virtual, but the knock-on is physical.
Right, there's 2 sides to that conversation. One is the direction you're going there, which is have less of it or cleanse it out on a more frequent basis. You can go the other way, though, and kind of go, we just got to find a different solution to how we store data, where we store it, and how you cool the thing down, cool the data center down. So you can take somewhere like, I think it's Norway, where they've taken an old coal mine. They've gone down deep where it's, guess what, pretty cold. It happens to be near the sea, so they've thrown a turbine out into the sea, and that pumps cold water down into that coal mine to run, cold water cooling rather than electrical cooling. Now, there's a country that has an awful lot of old coal mines. I don't know if you know it. But again, someone's got to be innovative, but someone's got to put the investment in. So if we said we happen to live on an island that has a lot of coal mines or mines disused that go very deep, we happen to have a bunch of oceans running around us, why aren't we looking at kind of that kind of thing? How come they are and we're not? So again, you go back to that sharing thing. Is the world really sharing ideas? I'm not too sure it is. would the government fund it? Should private sector fund it? Did Google come in and kind of say, or Amazon and kind of AWS just kind of go, do you know what, we'll do that for you, but we want something in return? Again, it goes back to economics, doesn't it? You've got to have a business case. You've got to have ROI. No one's going to do anything for free. I don't imagine in the world we're suddenly going to say, let's stop flying. You know, you can now never leave the country ever again. You're in the UK, you stay in the UK. Every country stops flying. That's highly unlikely. We've just got to find a different way, whether it's different fuel, different type of transport, whatever it may be. Is the world going to stop innovating? No. You know, will somebody be working? We know that, you know, Rolls-Royce are working on, they've got their own electric plane already, haven't they? There's others working on sending planes higher so they, you know, float more, my simple language. So it's not always about stopping something. It's about finding a better solution for it. The journey to electric cars has probably taken off more in the last 3 to 4 years in the UK than anybody ever expected. In effect, we're probably running ahead of the ability of the infrastructure to keep up. And that will be the next problem, which will be, right, we've now got a critical mass. We're telling all the car companies that from 2030, they've got to do electric only. They're all going, yeah, okay. So I think Ford yesterday said they're going to stop the Fiesta because they want to create more capacity for the electric cars.
That is as a Ford Fiesta driver in my youth, that is terrible news, I must say.
I think it was the most popular car ever sold by number, by like 4 million or something crazy. And it was most people's first car. That's where I read that yesterday somewhere. But again, that challenge will be the infrastructure. So how do we actually get ahead of it? Again, same question. Do the government fund it? Do the private sector fund it? How do we make sure that it's affordable? How do you get everybody onto that journey? What do we do with all of the ICE cars? Where do they all go? You know, the big ICE graveyard in the sky somewhere, but they've got to be taken apart. So there's a lot to do. And again, you come back to that is what we do. We'll run a program that helps anybody do any one of those things we've just talked about. We just got to get better at it and get quicker at it.
Well, and I think it's a great point, James, because actually there is that practical element of, and I love the mine shaft example because, like you say, once you have got over the complexity of who pays and are we doing it, then, like you say, it's a project. Cables have got to go in. You know, you've got to get the cooling in, etc. But I think implicit in that is something that, again, I'm no expert on this topic, but I think a lot of people are looking for the new solution, the sort of the brand, you know, what's the innovation as opposed to, you know, how can we, it's still an innovation, but how can we use what we've got? How can we, you know, it's not as sexy. You know, a solar panel is sexy. Sticking stuff down a mine shaft isn't sexy.
But there's an interesting one, is it? So, you know, driving here today along the M4, you've obviously got one of the, I think the second biggest solar farm in the UK by Reading on the M4. And you drive past it and the first time you see it, you go, wow, that looks nice. Look at all the mirrors. And by the 100th time you've gone past, you kind of go, it's a bit of an eyesore. But if you think of flying over the UK, the most of the country is still green. As much as we all think we live in, you know, urban areas, you fly over the country, most of it is green. A lot of it is paid for to be left fallow because we don't farm it anymore. So why don't we just chuck solar panels on all of it? They don't have to be silver. Let's be innovative. Let's find a way to turn them green.
So they look like
I don't know if that's even possible to have a green solar panel, but again, that's somebody's job to kind of work out, isn't it? Because again, we're in an island that's surrounded by wind, by sea, by sun, albeit not as much as we'd like. We just need to, as you said, look at what we've actually got. What can we do now rather than worrying about who's going to come up with the next product that no one's ever had before in the world?
No, I think so. And I think particularly given where we're recording this in our office in Bath, which is a well-known mining area. You know, I live in an old mining village just up the road. I think there's a mine under the next village. It's that sort of place. So, you know, there's suddenly all of these, I guess, vacant, empty mines doing nothing. And yeah, how do we innovate? You know, be it the green solar panel. Maybe we'll talk after this. That can be our next invention. But I think that practical element is really powerful because there is probably a lot you can do quite quickly by thinking practically, not sort of blue sky innovation, which is sometimes where these conversations go.
No, but again, you go back to that first one I mentioned, buildings, that it might not make a massive difference, right? But why couldn't we just say, let's take the City of London as a big metropolis. Every rooftop has to have a rooftop garden. Let's go with that generic, you know, trees, shrubs, whatever. It's covered in green rather than just covered in grey paint and plant as a machinery plant, not the plant. That surely is something that's quite simple that if we wanted to do, we could do. And we just need to think of all of those things. But it needs, as you said, that red box thinking needs to happen somewhere. It needs to be owned by someone. It needs to be driven by someone. Now, my point of view it kind of goes with that should be somewhat government led. That should be BEIS kind of driving that conversation. And then you hand back out to the private sector to actually implement and kind of say, now we've got our list, let's get on with doing some of that stuff.
We could talk all day about this, but I think in the interest of your time, and I know you have a drive home and you've got some errands to run in town before the shop shuts as well. So I don't want to keep you for the whole time. And I'm going to bring us to, and I feel that after talking about how do we save the world through mine shafts, I feel this next topic is much lighter and, depending on your view, less significant, albeit as I run a marketing agency, I do think it has quite significance. Is that at some points, and this seems like the only time I can ask you in today's conversation, I really wanted to dig into your LinkedIn videos, because anyone who has gone, anyone who's listening to this, they would have looked at your LinkedIn and gone, James is doing these videos. And I think they're great. I think they're really interesting. And the big thing that I'm interested in is you are probably the only consulting CEO I know who does this. As someone who works in marketing, I've been shouting about it. Others much longer than me have been shouting about it before me. But you're the first CIO I know who's picked up their camera and just spoken to their LinkedIn following. And so it's a simple question, but I'd love to know.
Am I just talking to myself?
It's one of those deep philosophical questions, James. Maybe tell us the answer. What inspired you to do it? Why did you go, right, I'm going to do these videos?
Two angles. One, I guess I was thinking, as part of that conversation we're having earlier about next generation, future growth, how do you take the company? How do you take Project One to the next level? I was just trying to think of how do we improve our own brand awareness, if you want to call it kind of that. You can follow all the traditional things, but if you go back to the other conversation where you've got to stand out, whether as an individual or a company, I was just trying to find a way to do that. Now, my kind of secret side of getting away from work is rubbish TV, as we were talking about with Married at First Sight and Below Deck and Made in Chelsea. That's my way of switching off. But the other side is YouTube. And it doesn't matter whether I'm watching something to do with watches, cars, aggregates. There's three that I kind of watch on a regular basis. I've kind of got my little suite that I follow. But it was watching them last year, ironically, that kind of gave me the idea, because there are some guys out there like Daniel Louisi, Yanamize, TGE, and it was all, their approach was very raw. It was very much just a camera, conversation. If it had bloopers in it, don't worry about it, just crack on. Now, I'm not going to a YouTube world. I'm not trying to create YouTube. But I kind of thought, what was the equivalent that I could use for Project One? Now, clearly, my life is just laden with travel. Every day, most days, I'm out somewhere. And it was really kind of what's that kind of world where you can kind of just talk about something that you're seeing, hearing, doing, without getting in too much into the detail. So I tend to aim for 4 minutes. It's kind of where I'm going. It's that stuff that you can watch when you're on the train on the way home. It's not trying to write the world. It's not trying to be an academic. It's not trying to prove a theory. It's just the ramblings of a consultant. And like I said, I started with the same fears. So I sat there coming into Christmas last year and I thought, you know what? Next year, I'm going to do this. We'll do it for the year. And I started off with the view that I'd do one a week. Hence, they started with a 22.12. Within 12 weeks, I've broken we're going to do it every week because I just couldn't keep up. So again, if anyone else is thinking about it, don't put too much pressure on yourself. Just go with it. Some weeks I put out 2 or 3, some 2-3 weeks in a row, I might do nothing. I've got to have something to talk about. I'm not going to create it for the sake of creating it. It's not scripted. It is just talking into an iPhone. It takes 5 odd minutes, 6 minutes to kind of record the varying bits. I sit on the train on the way home. I use iMovie just to edit them together. I put in the title slide, which is easy, and I hit post. Now, as you said, I didn't know where they were going to go or what they're doing. I had no aspiration or expectation. I just wanted to kind of talk about some of the stuff that we see and do, that impacts us. Interestingly, from an outcome point of view, it's been a bit strange, the number of people that you'll have a conversation with who kind of go, I watched your video. I've seen your videos. And that caught me by surprise. I did not expect that. I kind of just put them out there and in effect, I let them go. As with anything to do with LinkedIn, they kind of build through time. They generally do 3,500 to 7,000 views pretty quickly. But then obviously they just disappear off the bottom and the next one comes along. So they're not there for any particular reason. It is brand awareness. From my point of view, we cannot pay to advertise in an airport. I will never have a, welcome to London.
You're not HSBC all over Heathrow.
Absolutely. Welcome to London. Here's Project One. And therefore, we've got to find our way of getting our name out there. So if people see me and know that I'm Project One, and that points them towards us and our service and our team and our people and our solutions, then absolutely great. If it doesn't, well, it doesn't matter. I've not lost anything. It's not cost me anything. I don't want to bring in a media team to start running a professional video shoot every week. That is not the intent. It will run its natural course. I do think it is let's do this for this year, and then let's see what next year looks like. It might be something slightly different. It might be just a tweak on what we've got. I don't know. But I had the same fears that everyone can imagine, which was nobody's watching, nobody cares, everyone thinks you're talking rubbish. But in reality, people don't. They like it. And you'll never please everybody. So as long as there's enough people liking it and stuff, I'm okay. Doesn't need likes and comments. It's just, I like the fact that people watch it.
I mean, firstly, thank you, because I think it's something that a lot of consultants, be it CEOs, be it analysts, any grade or lack thereof grade to our conversation earlier, I think have those fears over. So the fact someone in your position doing it, seeing those results, and your point as well around it's not all comments and likes on the LinkedIn, it's people, because I think sometimes it's so easy to be sucked into, oh, well, this did well because it got 50 comments, 50 likes, and actually, in a world which is relationship led, you're probably better having one person go, I like that, James, or it's nice to see. But actually the unseen results are sometimes forgotten. So it's quite powerful to know that as well.
Yeah. So I'm not an analytics freak, but I do take a little glance every now and again. And all I look at is the fact that the cohort it seems to be hitting is the whole C-suite, MD, exec, big corporate kind of world as well. Ironically, big consulting firms are on there quite a lot, which I like, because again, goes back to that whole collaboration thing. I'm not here to try and say we're doing something fundamentally different to everyone else, but it is about just going out there and just being open, honest, talking about the stuff that we're all talking about anyway. I'm not coming up with any rocket science, but just go out there and be me. And I just, I could have just put a written post up every week. I don't think it would have got anywhere near that kind of level, because it is just slightly different. But then, as you said, as much as you may say I'm the only one, there are others, and it will grow in time. And therefore, I've got to go and find something different that then catches someone's eye.
I'm seeing a YouTube channel with aggregates, watches, and wraps all in the same, James. Well, and to your point, so you touched on something, though, that I think does stop a lot of people. And it's why I'm keen to dig into this, because I agree with you. You've got to stand out, got to be different. And as more people do it, those who aren't will be lagging behind. As you touched on, you've got to have something to say. And sometimes when I speak to consultants informally, there's almost part of it's imposter syndrome. What have I got to say? But I also think our industry has almost created a rod for its own back in the kind of obsession with thought leadership. So, you can't just have thought, you have to have a new thought. And you mentioned you've got comfortable with all of this kind of. How do you approach that? How do you think, what am I going to speak about today? And how are you comfortable with the fact that it might not be, the Isaac Newton theory on something, and it is, it isn't that level of thought leadership? Or
I don't overthink it. I mean, it's as simple as that. Let's go back to these are not prepped, in that sense. Yeah, I've got kind of a list of things that over time I'll kind of go, I just add that to the list. It may happen, it may never happen. But if you're going to track back through them, they're all generally about something that is happening at that point in time, whether it's to do with the fact that we're all in 2023 planning at the moment. It's one of the recent ones. It could be a whole ERP thing because we're all driving towards, S4HANA journeys by 2027. It could be about things that we see going wrong a lot of the time. And if people just listen to what goes wrong a lot of the time, you can actually stop it happening. They're all very, very common topics. As you said, there is no Isaac Newton moments in amongst this. And again, I had to get over that whole thing of where you had that fear of, are you just going to get trolled to death? And are people just going to tell you you're wrong? And, oh, this is boring. And, I've seen this and there's no rocket science. Yeah, there's not meant to be rocket science. It's just a guy talking and showing, having a conversation in effect with myself. But it's a conversation. None of those conversations aren't ones that have already happened in a customer environment, at any given point in time. And I'd have with anybody at any given point in time.
You've actually touched on something there. And I'm going to ask this because I very often in what I do get the question or get people who have a sort of assumption around the expectations of CEOs and customers, so executive customers. They say, our marketing or our deliverables or our certain thing has to be a certain way because it's a CEO seeing it. So they have to, has to be polished, it has to be slick. And you touched on the fact you're getting feedback on it. So if I'm assuming here, and tell me if I'm wrong, but you've been speaking to your clients, the senior people, they're watching your videos. And as we touched on at lunch, what struck me about your videos as well, and you mentioned there, is you pull your iPhone out, you chat for 3-4 minutes, you put a cover slide and you fire it on. That, for many consultants, I think would be quite alien because it is, inverted commas, unpolished. And I'd love to get your take on that and almost what you hear from your CEO clients. Are they saying, God, James, this is, love this, but it's too unpolished for me? Actually, are they just normal humans? They don't care how polished it is. Sort of, what would you say to anyone who has that concern of, I'd love to do this, but because it's not got all of these fancy bits with it, I can't?
Most people don't comment. Occasionally, you'll get the small cohort that kind of say it is unpolished and, you need to tidy it up kind of thing. And that's not necessarily customers. That's just general feedback. But in reality, most would never mention it. And I think most don't mention it because they actually just like the fact you are just having a conversation. And it is like you'd be having it in an office or in a street or on the way to the tube. I think at the point where you get to the polished stuff, then you're getting to, I think as you kind of describe it, a proper marketing video that's then scripted and it's got a beginning, middle and end and all that kind of malarkey about it. And that's not what this is trying to be, because I think those corporate videos belong in a completely different space. I think if you go back to our earlier conversation, we're a boutique, we're an SME, we've got far more flexibility. Do I think I could do this if I was working in a big firm? No. I imagine there'd be a whole raft of people who'd want to critique it long before it ever got released. And, it would have far more rules and regulations about it. But I also know, I'm not saying anything controversial. I'm not going out there to do anything maliciously. It's just a conversation. And I guess to your point, thought leadership, I don't know. I mean, I guess age catches up with all of us, doesn't it? As you said earlier, we used to look up at the big CEOs and the C-suites and the lieutenants and the divisional kind of guys all those years ago and think I could never be one of them. And, you never thought, or you always thought they'd be above you. I'm kind of now getting to the age where there aren't that many above me. And ironically, I know a lot of them because I've grown up with them, which again changes the conversation that you're having with them. And so it's not thought leadership, it's just common sense conversation. And you're talking about topics that they're thinking about. I know there's a whole bunch of companies out there going, how am I going to get S4 HANA in by 2027?
It sounds simple, but I think is a really powerful point. And for anyone listening, also those who aren't CEOs, they're earlier in their careers, client problems are always, take what you do as an organization. Project and program management has existed since probably the dawn of time with the Egyptians and pyramids. And actually the things that concern CEOs, executives, certain things are always the same and others, like you say, are event driven, but you can probably guess or know what they are if you have 2 or 3 chats and then sharing ideas, tips to help with that.
So that goes back to kind of one of the key principles of Project One. It is about joining dots. It is about sharing ideas. I've got absolutely no issue in joining different functions. So you can take a CFO from a national grid and introduce them to the CFO at AstraZeneca and kind of go, you're both doing a finance transformation, have a chat. And it's done in a completely friendly way. So again, it's not with intent. It's not there to create anything. It's just to say, I know you guys are thinking the same thing. I know you've got the same problems. Go and look at and learn about how each other works. And again, because that doesn't exist to them in the normal world. And because of the privileged position we sit in, we know who they all are. And conversely, the other way, if anyone comes and says to me, do you know anyone in this position or that company or this industry? Again, we can go, yeah, chances are we do. And therefore we can just kind of join people together for conversations. They're all Chatham House rules. It's all, managed. But again, it is about how we help those customers, those clients, those organizations to all succeed, because the world's too small.
Oh, no, I fully agree, James. And then, after those discussions under Chatham House rules, you know what people are concerned about and you have videos. And I think you're probably, to close this, something you said much earlier on, but I think people so often forget in the digital world is actually, you touched on it, that there's no cost to these videos. So as long as you have an iPhone.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, yes.
And a selfie stick.
I was going to, when I was watching them actually ahead of this, I was going to ask you if there's a selfie stick. I thought.
It depends. Some of them do, some of them don't. I've done all sorts. It depends where you are and what you're doing and what you've got.
But I think that point around is, as long as you're not saying anything that is rude, defamatory or going to, cause upset for someone you care about. And I deliberately say that because people can get upset. there are professional getting upsetters. And so as long as it's not going to harm your company, your clients, your career, the cost is zero. And the worst that happens is it's forgotten. And with that context, there can only be upside. If you're happy to give your 5 minutes, there can only be upside from that. So I think a really interesting conversation as well for anyone listening and anyone who wants to do the same. So we will see how many more people
do the same or find their own thing that works for them. It works for me. I'm a picture orientated person. I'm visual. Therefore, that resonates with me the same as YouTube does. Writing a article, a couple of thousand things, that doesn't resonate with me at all. I tried that and it didn't work, and I didn't like it.
Well, and you're currently seeing what my preferred is. But I think actually a brilliant point as well of our industry's default is blogs. At some point you mentioned, sort of how the industry's changed. At some point someone said all content must be a blog. And actually not everyone has left that yet. Whereas, like you say, some people prefer pictures, some people prefer audio.
Our brains are all wired in a very different way. I know that, and I've worked that out a long time ago from my own kind of childhood and school kind of world. Everybody is different, and you've got to find the bit that works for you and works for your audience. Will my stuff, or our stuff, to be fair, work for everyone? No, absolutely not. We also, as an organization in Project One, know the types of customers and clients that like us and want to work with us. I also know the ones who wouldn't like us and wouldn't want to work with us. Again, it's a well-trodden path. We need to just focus on the bits that do work and not worry too much about the bits that don't, because as you said, there's plenty to go around.
Completely. Well, we're coming to the last two questions, James, and just because the first one, and just because you've talked about your style, your preference for pictures and your love of YouTube. And after this as well, I'll give you some crap TV recommendations as well. There's a fantastic series on Netflix called Indian Matchmaking, which if you love at first sight or first dates, highly recommend. But this question's usually about books, but I'm going to broaden it out and you steer me with the medium. But the question is, what is the book or books that either have had the biggest impact on you or you've gifted most often? And as I say, it doesn't have to be books, but...
Well, that's good, because I don't do books. I struggled with books even in school, and it's never changed. The only one I ever, in the industry, read and liked, which is really simple, it's kind of like quite a junior book to read, was the whole My Iceberg is Melting. And I have given that to a lot of consultants in their late 20s, just to kind of go... You've been here a few years. You kind of know, you think you know what you're doing. Now have a read of this. And it is literally like a one night you'll read this book. But it just puts it all into context really, really quickly. And it's simple because it, in my mind anyway, it paints the picture of what's happening with the characters, so it's more fiction than non-fiction. But that's really as far as books go, right? I am, as I said, a TV / YouTube / video kind of more orientated, and that then takes you to some of the podcast stuff. So putting aside my aggregates and watches and cars world, there's then the high performing podcast. I think that's fantastic. That links back personally for me because I liked my sport, and therefore hearing predominantly ex-professional sports people come on and talk about exactly the same challenges, the same fears, the same barriers, and their way to kind of move their world forward is fantastic. And, there's over 100 episodes of that. So knock yourself out. They're all an hour long. And if you're that way inclined, they will resonate, with a lot of people. But other than that, no, just go and find a YouTube channel. There are a lot of them. But then again, there's a lot of them on every topic. You've got to find the presenter that resonates with you. And again, I go for the more informal, the more characterful people. But I think there's a lot that we can all learn. As much as people can sit there going, what's he doing watching all of them? The amount of stuff that kind of transports across from those watching those videos into our world or gives me ideas of things we can look at is amazing. I never thought that would happen, but it's there in spades.
I think firstly, the book I love because I actually have never had that recommended. So yeah, I don't usually open this question up, but I've got to ask it. Why you specifically said you gave that to people in their late 20s? And maybe if this spoils the book, stop me.
No, it doesn't spoil the book.
Why late 20s?
I think, as I said, at that point in time, you've got a cohort of people who think they know what they're there to do. But in reality, they've only seen the top of the iceberg. And there's far more to it. And therefore, they need to understand it. It's a bit like kind of coming into Project One. My focus when I came in was about delivery and doing that kind of thing. I didn't understand the finance side of it. And on that journey, you've got to find out what finance means. And then finance breaks down into subsets, doesn't it, of which bits you need to know. And then as you go further on, you want to know more on one particular type. That book at that age, I think, just starts to say to people, there is more to this industry than you think. It's not just about delivery. That whole relationship side, that whole business development side, that whole, everything all starts to come together. And you can't do what we all do without knowing it all. And you're not going to know that at 27.
I think really puts the recommendation into context. Definitely one to, I'm going to go and get a copy for that and might be want to pass out to the team. I've had others recommend Who Moved My Cheese, which feels quite similar. Yeah. I don't know if that's one you've ever similar sort of, wafer thin can be read in an evening. And I'm also a big fan of the High Performance Podcast. We'll trade podcasts after this, but your YouTube points as well, that different people appeal to different people. And I think it works, as we talked about with LinkedIn, works both ways. So no, I think some great recommendations. And no, it doesn't have to all be books. I realize the longer I run this podcast, it's not all books.
Not all books. Some of us don't do words.
And this last question, and I'll ask it as I normally do, although I appreciate it. It perpetuates what we talked about around consulting grade structures. And after our conversation, I feel maybe I need to completely extrapolate grades from this because it was easy and, it was the world I grew up in. It's where I started. So the question is, you have three people in front of you and one is just starting out in their consulting career. So I'd know them as an analyst or a, graduate. Then you have a second person who is sort of mid to late 20s, for want of a better word. So I would have called them a manager when I was in consulting, but they've kind of, a bit to your, book recommendation, they've learned a bit, but they've not learned everything. And then the third person is somebody who is approaching a senior leadership role. So I would have called it a partner in a traditional firm, but you might say someone joining your senior leadership. And the question is, what one piece of advice would you give to each of them?
I think the one starting out, just get as much exposure as you can. Don't get pigeonholed. Just jump around. Go and see the world, but see consulting. Go and see different client and customer environments, work in different teams, get the exposure, get to understand that different things happen in different ways. I'll probably go a bit higher, go mid-range, kind of that senior manager kind of stage. Decide what you want to be, but do it in its fullest context. So don't pigeonhole yourself. It's a long way from there to retirement. So leave yourself with some wiggle room to move. And at that point, do what makes you enjoy it. I don't know how many years I've not had one of those Sundays where you kind of go, oh, God, it's Monday tomorrow. It's because I love what I do. I enjoy what I do and I want to do tons of it. And they need to find that at that age because you do need to start settling down, don't you, at some point? The one heading for partner track, I'll be a little bit controversial. I think you need to decide whether you want to do what type of firm you want to do that in. Knowing what I know now, I think there are far more and better opportunities in the SME world than anywhere else. And therefore, don't get stuck on the name. Don't get stuck on the title of partner or senior partner or equity partner or anything else. Just actually go and look at what you want to do and what you actually want to be known for, because you're going to be in it or you want to be in it for a long time from that point onwards. And that will be the making of your career, I guess, won't it, at that point? So go and find the one that fits you best and then just go all in. You've got to be fully invested into it. There's no turning back at that point. So totally in.
Well, James, I think some great advice and a great place for us to finish today. So thank you very much.
No, thank you.
It's been great fun. Thank you also for coming all the way to Bath. It was lovely to have lunch with you before. It's been a great conversation. And I guess just for anyone, probably the last thing to ask is for anyone who has sort of listened to this, they want to find out more about you, they want to find out more about Project One, where would you point them to? Where can they get in touch?
Project One, just go through the website. We're having that rebuilt, so wait for the relaunch, but you can go and have a look at the current version. Me personally, feel free to stalk me on LinkedIn and contact me through there. No problem at all.
Fantastic. Well, we'll put links to both the current Project One website and your LinkedIn on the show notes. And yes, thank you very much for this, James. It's been great and all the best for the rest of your week.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Cheers. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Climbing Consulting. If you have any guest recommendations, comments, ideas, thoughts on how I can make this show better for you, just drop me an email. It's nick@createengage.co.uk, and I really look forward to hearing from you.